Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition plunged into chaos on Monday after mass overnight protests over the sacking of his defense chief piled pressure on the government to halt its bitterly contested plans to overhaul the judiciary. As news of the dismissal spread, tens of thousands of protesters, many waving blue and white Israeli flags, took to the streets late at night across the country and on Monday. Crowds gathered outside Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem, at one point breaching a security cordon. Some 3 months since taking office, Netanyahu's nationalist coalition has been plunged into crisis over the bitter divisions exposed by its flagship judicial overhaul plans. Despite the popular unrest, Netanyahu, on trial on corruption charges that he denies, has vowed to continue with the project he says is needed to rein in activist judges and restore the proper balance between an elected government and the judiciary. As protesters poured into the streets, police used water cannons to push them back from Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, while in Tel Aviv, where hundreds of thousands have taken to the streets since the beginning of the year, protesters lighted several bonfires on a main highway. The protests dwindled as the night went on, and eventually police forcefully removed a smaller crowd that refused to leave. It was not immediately clear whether the protests will affect the government's tactics. At least 3 Likud ministers said publicly that it was time to reevaluate their strategy and they would support halting the legislation if Netanyahu decided to do so. The head of the parliamentary committee deciding on the legislation said discussions will continue on Monday. The crisis came as Israel's security establishment has been bracing for potential violence in the coming weeks as the Muslim holy month of Ramadan overlaps with the Jewish Passover and the Christian Easter celebration. Netanyahu had been expected to make a televised statement on Monday morning announcing the plans which he says are needed to restore balance to the system of government, but that critics see as a threat to democracy that had been suspended. With the army reinforcing units in the occupied West Bank after a year of unrelenting violence that has killed more than 250 Palestinian gunmen and civilians and more than 40 Israelis, the removal of the defense minister fed accusations that the government was sacrificing the national interest for its own. Let's remember, the turmoil comes as a key moment in the passage of the legislation, with a bill giving the executive more control over the appointment of judges expected to be brought for ratification this week in the Knesset, where Netanyahu and his allies control 64 out of the 120 seats.